"You don't belong here." That's what she said, loud enough for people 3 rows away to glance up from their pre-flight drinks. Sebastian Wolf, 11 years old, had just fastened his seatbelt in 2A, first class. The water on his tray hadn't even stopped trembling. He blinked up at the woman in navy heels and a tight bun. "I'm sorry?" The flight attendant crossed her arms, her name tag catching the overhead light. "Heather." "This seat," she said, slower this time, "is for our premium passengers." Sebastian reached into the front pocket of his gray hoodie and pulled out his boarding pass. "It says 2A. That's me." Heather barely glanced. Her smile was the kind adults use when they've already made up their mind. "Where are your parents?" "I'm traveling alone." Her eyes narrowed, and something in her tone sharpened. "Well, there must have been a mistake. Come with me. You'll sit in economy." Around them, the air thickened. No one spoke. One man lowered his phone. A woman stopped mid-sip. Sebastian sat still for a moment. I did nothing wrong, he thought, but saying it out loud wouldn't help. He grabbed his backpack and stood. He walked the aisle like it weighed 1,000 pounds. No one made room. No one met his eyes. Near row 3, a silver-haired woman, Mrs. Doris Elliott, watched silently. She'd seen it all. Her fingers tapped gently on her phone. Back in row 29, next to the bathroom, Sebastian sat down. The seat was half broken. The air smelled like hand soap and old coffee. He pulled out his phone. "She moved me to the back, said I didn't belong, send." And in a tall office building across the ocean, a man in a dark suit read the message. He didn't reply right away. He just stood up and said to his assistant, "Activate the file, Ether 1, now." Sebastian stared at the screen, waiting. His legs barely touched the floor in the cramped economy seat, and the hum of the cabin seemed louder back here. Colder, too. He could still feel eyes on him, even though he was tucked behind a curtain and 2 rows of strangers. Maybe it was in his head, or maybe not. A ding broke the silence. "Which flight?" He typed back, quickly but carefully. "North Air 407, Munich to Denver, gate C12. She didn't even look at my ticket, Dad. She just told me to move." He hit send and tucked his phone away, letting it rest on his leg. Then he stared out the window. Clouds drifted below them, white and endless. But his stomach felt heavy, like the seatbelt sign was pressed against his chest. Up front, first class had moved on. Champagne glasses clinked. Someone chuckled at a business podcast in their noise-canceling headphones. Back in row 29, a flight attendant named Alicia leaned across the aisle to refill a cup of water. She had seen it happen. Not all of it, but enough. She remembered Heather's voice, sharp, dismissive, the way she hadn't even checked the manifest. Alicia had hesitated just for a moment. Should she speak up? Should she ask? But Heather had seniority, 15 years in. The kind of seniority that came with unspoken rules. Don't challenge the lead, don't get involved. Alicia looked down the aisle. She could just barely see the top of Sebastian's head. Small, still. Something about the way he hadn't argued, how he just nodded and walked, made her feel sick. In row 3, Mrs. Doris clicked open her TikTok app. She wasn't tech-savvy, not really, but she knew how to post. Caption: "Little boy in first class told to move. Didn't fight, just left. But why?" She hesitated, then hit upload. Somewhere over the Atlantic, 12,000 feet in the air, the story had already started traveling faster than the plane, and Sebastian didn't even know it yet. In the galley up front, Heather Lang poured herself a cup of coffee with one hand and straightened her collar with the other. She always believed presentation was part of authority. Crisp uniform, hair tight, voice calm but firm. The kind of presence that stopped people from asking too many questions. She didn't like being questioned. Alicia, the junior flight attendant, stood quietly by the tray stack, pretending to sort cups. She finally spoke, her voice careful. "Hey, was there an issue with the boy's ticket earlier?" Heather didn't even look up. You saw him. Hoodie, no guardian, sitting in 2A like he owned the place. But did you check the manifest? Heather blew lightly on her coffee and gave a short laugh. I've been doing this a long time, Alicia. You know when someone doesn't belong, you can see it, feel it. Alicia hesitated. He had a boarding pass. People print fake passes all the time, especially kids trying to sneak into first class. Alicia frowned. She'd heard of that happening, sure, but this felt different. The boy didn't sneak. He looked surprised, embarrassed, and he hadn't argued. Still, Heather kept talking, more to herself than anyone else. Honestly, it's not about one kid. It's about maintaining the tone. People see a child sitting in first, they assume it's a free-for-all. Then it's chaos. I acted quickly. That's what I'm trained to do. Alicia said nothing. Heather finished her coffee in one long sip, then turned back toward the aisle. Anyway, it's over. Situation handled. But just as she walked past row 3, she caught the glance of a silver-haired woman staring at her with quiet disapproval. Heather didn't break stride, but her smile faltered. Back in the galley, Alicia opened her phone and quietly pulled up the passenger list. Row 2A, Sebastian Wolf, paid, verified. Priority check-in your first-class fare. Her stomach dropped. Heather didn't just make a mistake. She made a judgment, and she didn't even bother to be right. What about you? Have you ever seen someone get judged before they even had a chance to explain themselves? If you were Alicia, would you have spoken up? Tell us below. Mrs. Doris Elliott never liked flying much. At 68, she'd seen enough airports, delays, and overcooked chicken or pasta meals to last a lifetime. But today's flight felt heavier. She sat in 3B, hands folded neatly over her lap, eyes drifting to where the boy had once sat. 2A. Empty now. Cold. And wrong. She glanced at her phone. The screen still showed the paused recording, Sebastian's quiet confusion, the tight smile on that flight attendant's face, the moment he stood without a fight. She didn't know the boy. She didn't know his name. But she knew what she saw, and it didn't sit right. Her fingers hovered over the post button in TikTok. Caption: little boy kicked out of first class. Didn't argue, didn't cry, just left. Why? She hesitated. This wasn't her style. She usually posted baking tips or thrift store finds. But this wasn't about going viral. It was about what was right. Click, upload. Back in row 29, Sebastian stared out the window, the sun casting stripes across his tray table. He hadn't spoken since the text. He didn't cry, but his shoulders were stiff, like he was trying to make himself smaller. No one around him said anything. No one had the nerve. A couple sitting nearby exchanged looks, but kept quiet. On the ground, 38,000 feet below, the video hit TikTok's algorithm like a spark in dry grass. Within 10 minutes, it reached 10,000 views. By the time the plane crossed into U.S. airspace, it was over 300,000. The comments poured in. Why didn't anyone say something? This makes me sick. You can tell he had a real ticket. Look how he didn't fight back. One comment read, "This better reach his parents. That airline needs to answer." And soon it would. The conference room on the 48th floor of Wolf Energy's Denver headquarters had a view of the entire skyline. Glass walls, oak table, a quiet hum from the air system that never stopped. Magnus Wolf stood at the window, phone in hand, unread messages stacking like dominoes. But his eyes were locked on just one. She moved me to the back. Said I didn't belong. He hadn't responded yet. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he knew exactly what had to be done. Just minutes earlier, he'd been preparing for a contract signing, one that would make Wolf Energy the exclusive logistics partner for North Air's global expansion. It was a $1.2 billion deal. Years in the making. Everything aligned. Then came the video. His legal advisor had sent it with 2 words. You'll want to see this. Magnus had watched the entire clip. Watched his son be humiliated in silence. Watched the woman in uniform wave him away like a mistake. And just like that, the deal didn't matter anymore. He turned to his assistant. I need the Ether 1 portfolio opened. Full liquidity. We start acquiring now. She blinked. Sir, that's the dormant acquisition fund. I'm aware. Reactivate it. Quietly. We start with 12%. Go through Luxembourg, then Hong Kong. No headlines yet. Yes, Mr. Wolf. Yes, Mr. Wolf. He turned back to the window, jaw tight. He wasn't angry, not loudly. Magnus Wolf never shouted, but inside, something settled. A switch flipped. This wasn't about a contract. This was about dignity. And dignity, once stripped from a child in front of 100 strangers, didn't come back with apologies. It came back with power. He texted his son back at last. I saw the video. Sit tight. You did everything right. Then he opened a blank document on his screen and began drafting a new internal memo. Subject: Executive Realignment Opportunity, North Air Holdings. Because when people show you who they think you are, you show them who you actually are, preferably from the top. Somewhere over Newfoundland, the aircraft hummed steadily at 38,000 feet. Passengers napped. Podcasts played through wireless earbuds. The world seemed calm. But inside the cockpit, the mood had shifted. Captain Ron Everett glanced at the tablet mounted to his dash. A secure message had just come through, not from dispatch, not from tower control, but from executive operations. Priority alert. Upon arrival, crew manifest must be submitted for internal audit. Directive issued by North Air Executive Office. No external communication. Ron raised an eyebrow. He'd flown 30 years and only seen this kind of flag twice. Once during a security breach, and once during a major leadership overhaul. This wasn't routine. He didn't say anything out loud, but the silence in the cockpit became dense. Meanwhile, back in row 29, Sebastian sat quietly, arms folded. His backpack was zipped up and untouched. He hadn't spoken to anyone. He hadn't asked for anything. He'd simply waited, exactly as his father had told him. The notification on his phone had come through 5 minutes earlier. I saw the video. Sit tight. You did everything right. Just 12 words, but they held more weight than the metal walls around him. Sebastian didn't know what his dad was planning. He only knew that when his father said, "I'll handle it," he did. In the galley, Alicia poured coffee, her hands slightly shaky. She'd seen the same glance from the captain when the message came through. Something was off. Very off. Heather, of course, was unaware. She passed through first class, calm as ever, smiling politely as she adjusted trays and offered extra napkins. From her view, the issue with the boy was handled. Over. Done. Behind her. But from 30,000 feet above reality, something had started moving beneath her feet. Something with reach, with memory, and with enough quiet power to reroute everything. And the moment the wheels hit the runway, it wouldn't be turbulence she'd feel, but consequence. The plane descended smoothly into Denver International Airport, golden sunlight brushing the cabin windows as if nothing had happened. Passengers stretched their arms, gathered headphones, and reached for their bags in overhead bins. Just another flight, ending like any other, but not for everyone. In row 29, Sebastian remained still. He hadn't moved since the seatbelt sign chimed off. While the rest of the plane leaned forward, eager to leave, he leaned back, calm, watchful. His phone buzzed once. "Someone will meet you at the jet bridge. Take their lead." He slipped the phone back into his hoodie pocket without a word. In first class, Heather Lang checked her lipstick in the reflection of a closed monitor. She fixed her hair, straightened her scarf. She always liked to look polished when saying goodbye to premium guests. Just because the boy had made things awkward didn't mean she'd let it sour the entire flight. She had moved him. He didn't argue. Situation handled. From the cockpit, Captain Everett stepped out and walked calmly toward the galley, his voice low. "Heather, we've been asked to hold you and your crew on board for a brief debriefing. Standard protocol." Heather blinked. "Debriefing? For what? It's from the executive office, he said, avoiding eye contact. In the front of the aircraft, just past the boarding door, a man in a charcoal gray suit stood waiting. No name tag, no clipboard, just presence. He leaned toward a gate agent and quietly whispered something. The agent's eyes widened, then nodded fast. As passengers filed out, many barely noticed the quiet switch in tone, but a few felt it, especially Mrs. Doris, who gave Sebastian a small smile as she passed him in the aisle. A knowing smile. A quiet kind. "Mr. Wolf?" the man in the suit said as Sebastian approached the door. Sebastian nodded. "This way, please." They stepped off the plane together, turning away from the terminal crowd. A private door opened, no questions asked. Heather watched from the galley, unsure what she had just seen. The boy? Escorted? She frowned, then turned, only to find Captain Everett watching her now, his expression unreadable. "Get comfortable," he said. "You're not getting off just yet. What do you think Heather's feeling right now? Nervous? Confused? Still in control? Drop your guess below." In a press room just across the airport's executive wing, cameras clicked, microphones hummed, and journalists sat poised, notepads ready. The Wolf Energy logo shined on a screen behind the podium. But it wasn't energy news anyone expected. A spokesperson stepped up first. Short, formal, tense. "Thank you for joining us on short notice," she began. "Mr. Magnus Wolf will speak briefly and take no questions." That alone made the room stir. Magnus Wolf rarely appeared in public. When he did, it wasn't for briefings. It was for takeovers. Seconds later, he entered. Dark suit, no tie, eyes steady. He didn't approach the microphone right away. He looked at the crowd, then down at a small slip of paper in his hand. Just a single quote. "I believe in efficiency," he said finally, "and I believe in accountability." He let the silence sit. This morning, Wolf Energy, through its acquisition arm Ether One, secured 38.2% controlling interest in North Air Holdings. A flurry of camera shutters fired. "Effective immediately, I have assumed the role of interim CEO." Murmurs rippled. Reporters leaned forward. Some glanced at each other, stunned. "I won't be discussing financial strategy today. This announcement isn't about logistics. It's about something else." He looked directly into the camera now. "This week, one of our family members, a child, was dismissed from a seat he rightfully held. Not for safety, not for protocol, but for optics, for someone else's judgment." He held up the paper. "This is the boarding pass that seat was tied to. It had his name on it. That should have been enough." He folded the paper gently. "As of today, North Air will undergo a full internal audit of crew conduct policies. We will establish a public-facing dignity clause for all passengers, effective immediately." He nodded once and stepped back. No questions, no explanations, just order. And in that moment, somewhere on the far side of the airport, a certain first-class seat didn't feel so safe anymore. Heather Lang sat in the debriefing room, legs crossed, arms folded tighter than her pressed uniform. The walls were bare, no windows, just a long table and the low buzz of fluorescent lights. She wasn't nervous, not really. This was probably about the flight manifest or one of those surprise crew evaluations. But across the table sat two people she didn't recognize. Not from HR, not from in-flight ops. One wore a navy blazer with no logo. The other tapped a Wolf Energy tablet, the same branding that had just taken over their company. "Ms. Lang," the man began calmly, "we're conducting a formal review of your conduct on Flight 407. This is not a disciplinary hearing. Yet, we'd like to clarify a few things first." Heather smirked. "Happy to help." The woman spoke next. "You removed a child from first class without checking his boarding pass?" "He didn't look like he belonged there," Heather replied flatly. "And I've been in this business long enough to trust my instincts." The man tilted his head. And your instincts told you he was in the wrong seat? Yes. What if I told you, he said, tapping the screen. That boy was the son of your company's new CEO. Heather's breath caught for just a second, just enough to crack the surface. We've reviewed security footage, onboard video, and internal records, the woman continued. You didn't check the manifest. You didn't ask. You made a snap judgment based on appearance. Heather tried to recover. I was trying to protect the integrity of the cabin. The man nodded. And now we're protecting the integrity of the company. Alicia, seated 2 chairs down, stared at the table, silent. She'd already explained everything she saw and why she didn't speak up. She wasn't proud, but she was honest. That honesty might save her job. Heather's didn't stand a chance. 3 days later, Sebastian boarded another North Air flight. Same airline, different route. This time, Denver to New York. He carried the same backpack, wore the same gray hoodie, and moved with the same quiet composure. But everything else had changed. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, a uniformed North Air liaison met him with a clipboard and a kind smile. Mr. Wolf, welcome aboard. We've got you in 2A again. Sebastian gave a small nod. No need to explain that 2A used to mean something else. Now it meant something more. The cabin felt quieter than last time. Maybe it was the morning light slanting through the windows, or maybe it was the way every crew member glanced his way. Not with suspicion, but with awareness. The kind that comes when someone realizes they'd misjudged the weight of a moment, and now carried the memory of it. He reached his seat. Same leather, same little water glass waiting. But this time, no one told him he didn't belong. A new flight attendant, middle-aged, calm voice, stepped forward. If you need anything, Mr. Wolf, please don't hesitate. He nodded politely. Thank you. Across the aisle, a businessman leaned in slightly, curious. Hey, I think I saw your story online. That was you, right? Sebastian glanced up, unsure how to respond. Before he could answer, the man added, Glad you held your ground. Quiet strength. It speaks volumes. Sebastian smiled faintly and turned back to the window. He didn't need to explain himself. The world had already filled in the blanks. Meanwhile, at 35,000 feet, an internal memo circulated through every department in North Air. All crew are now required to verify boarding status before approaching a customer about seat issues. No assumptions, no exceptions. The memo was signed by Magnus Wolf, interim CEO. Back in 2A, Sebastian took out his tablet. Not to text, not to scroll, just to read. Something about the calm in that seat made him want to learn again. His eyes scanned the screen, and for the first time since the flight to Denver, he felt steady. He belonged here, not because someone said so, but because the truth finally matched the seat. 2 weeks later, a quiet Q&A article was published in the Sunday edition of the Denver Ledger. The headline read, "The boy in 2A breaks his silence, briefly." No flashy photos, no PR polish, just a one-page column tucked between the editorial and the obituaries, written by a seasoned reporter who'd requested a short interview with the boy the internet couldn't stop talking about. And, to everyone's surprise, Sebastian Wolf said yes. They met in a small bookstore cafe in Aspen, not far from his school. No cameras, no microphones, just coffee for the reporter and a cup of hot chocolate for Sebastian. The reporter started gently. "You didn't say much during the whole situation. Why now?" Sebastian shrugged. "I'm not really saying much now either. Just enough." The man smiled. "Fair. So, let me ask the one question everyone keeps asking. Why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you push back when she told you to move?" Sebastian looked out the window for a second, steam rising from his mug. Then he said calmly, "Because I knew my seat was right." The reporter paused. "That's it?" Sebastian nodded. "I didn't need to prove anything. I had my ticket. I just didn't think I should have to argue to be seen." That one sentence, "I knew my seat was right," became the headline across dozens of reposts. Within hours, It was trending as a quote. Within days, it was printed on tote bags, posters, and classroom walls. Teachers used it in discussions about dignity. Parents used it to teach confidence. And former passengers from Flight 407 shared it in their own stories. Alicia, the flight attendant who'd stayed quiet that day, printed it and taped it inside her locker. I knew my seat was right. Even Heather, now permanently dismissed from North Air and quietly removed from the industry, saw it online, and for the first time, she didn't scroll past it. She read it slowly, not with anger, not with regret, but with recognition, because she finally understood. The loudest responses aren't always shouted. It was almost poetic, the way she walked through the same jet bridge she'd ruled for years, but now with someone else leading the way. Heather Lang's shoes clicked against the sterile airport floor, a sound that used to echo confidence. Now, every step sounded louder than it should. Her North Air badge had been revoked. Her uniform, neatly pressed, was a ghost of what she no longer held. 2 security officers flanked her quietly as she exited the HR office on the executive floor. No cuffs, no scene. Just silence, that kind of silence you feel more than hear. The formal decision had come that morning. Heather Lang is hereby disqualified from serving in any capacity within the airline industry under the North Air Aviation Group or its affiliates, effective immediately. This decision is permanent and not subject to appeal. The wording was cold, clean, final. She had fought it at first, tried to claim it was misunderstanding, that she was just doing her job, that she had protected the brand. But the footage said otherwise. The passenger manifest said otherwise. And most importantly, the world said otherwise. A single boy, sitting still, saying nothing, had done what decades of corporate memos couldn't. He'd held up a mirror. Across the airport, in a glass conference room with no press, no cameras, and no ceremony, Magnus Wolf sat across from a dozen executives in dark suits. They were discussing new crew training protocols, revised dignity clauses, and how to roll out bias recognition across international hubs. He didn't talk much. He let others present, explain, defend. He only spoke once, when someone asked if the changes might be seen as an overreaction. He looked up from the tablet and said, without blinking, "What seat would you want your child in?" No one spoke again for a full minute. Meanwhile, Sebastian was in Aspen, walking down the school hallway toward his science lab. A classmate passed and smiled awkwardly, half respect, half curiosity. He didn't mind it. He wasn't a symbol. He was just a kid who didn't flinch. In his backpack was the original boarding pass from Flight 407, not framed, not laminated, just folded and kept. He wasn't keeping it because he wanted to remember what happened. He kept it because it reminded him that knowing you belong doesn't require permission. Back in row 3 of that fateful plane, Mrs. Doris Elliott sat once again, this time as a guest of honor. The airline had invited her to speak at their private ethics seminar. She didn't wear makeup, didn't speak loudly. But when she played the 23-second clip she'd recorded, the room fell into a hush. And then she said softly, "You don't have to yell to be right. Sometimes sitting quietly is the loudest thing you can do." The cabin crew clapped. A few even stood, because they knew this wasn't about a seat. It was about a system, and one quiet boy had moved more than just his place on the plane. If you've ever been overlooked, mislabeled, or quietly told you don't belong, let this story remind you, you do. And maybe, just maybe, the seat you're in today is exactly where change begins. Thanks for flying with us. See you on the next story, Tell Tales.